So thank you so much to our wonderful panelists for their first-person stories. We want to be able to open it up. We have a good 15 minutes left for questions from the audience. I certainly have some questions if other people don't, but I want to give people in the audience a chance first. Now I'm going to ask mine. Okay, I'll start with mine. My question is, so we had the new Catholic left in the 60s and the 70s, and I just wonder to what extent Catholicism was an influence for you personally or for the people that you wrote about. Some of you touched on that a little bit, but do you consider yourself Catholic today, and how influential is your faith, or was it Catholics or Catholicism maybe who were influential?
Once a Catholic, always a Catholic. But I'm not a practicing Catholic. But I became part of this Catholic group, and I have to say, we were talking about, I don't know how many of you saw the movie last night, and about community, and Dan Berrigan's community on Block Island. And I have to say, the community of people that I met, this Catholic resistance group, that I was lucky enough to meet, their compassion, their commitment to ending the war, their friendship, all of it was really amazing to me. In fact, I still am friends with just about everybody.
I was talking to my friend, Susanna Cavallo, about this very matter earlier, and I'm not a practicing Catholic anymore, but it is so deeply both the religion and the theology even, although I feel like I'm in over my head theologically speaking whenever I get in a conversation about it. But still, I'm sort of endlessly fascinated by the language of theology. And I find myself constantly working my way around Catholic questions. And it's my practice. And I feel like it's the way in which I live my life, that I don't necessarily work with the institutional church very much, but I love the religion.
Also, not a raised Catholic, not a practicing Catholic currently, and I would say I thought about this a lot when I was doing the Catonsville book. It was not completely coincidental that 9 Catholics entered local board 33. However, the way they articulated their reasons for being there, I think it transcended a particular religious tradition. It was intensely political in Catonsville and elsewhere. So it's there. It's for the 9. I think it was embedded, and certainly many of them had been in religious order. Dan, Phil, the Melvilles, John Hogan. Most of them had been deeply enmeshed in the church in various ways, but they didn't simply say as Catholics. It was often as humans or as Christians. It was there, but it wasn't necessarily the most foregrounded piece explicitly.
When I was an undergraduate, I did a term paper on the Camden 28, and a buddy of mine and I went to Camden and talked to some people there. But when we came back to campus, we had a chance to talk to one of your number, Father Ned Murphy, and he was just so gracious. And but the one thing that he would not talk about is sort of my question for you. You hinted in your presentation about. You said, "Oh, I knew there must have been an informant," and there was. And Ned said, "I don't talk about Bob Hardy." So I'm wondering if you do talk about Bob Hardy and what it felt like to have someone from the inside be the informant in that particular matter.
So Bob Hardy was in our group. He was a friend of Mike Giacondo, a brother and he invited him into the group. And he was an ex-Marine. He was about 6'6". He was a huge man, but he was older than me. So I wasn't befriending him. But some of us really didn't like him and had a feeling about him. And so in the draft board, we knew, well, first of all, when Guy Goodwin came in the room, he started going up to each of us saying, "Hi, Cookie, does your brother still play the drums?" They said to me. So they were alerting me that they'd been watching me, dating my family. And I was underground at the time I did this. I didn't tell you that whole thing. Anyway, because of the Harrisburg. I was an unindicted co-conspirator in the Harrisburg 7 case. But anyway, so Bob, this, Trump is in the story. What do you hear this piece? So Bob Hardy goes to the FBI and he says, "My good friends are involved in this conspiracy with outside agitators." So basically he was there saying, "I'm friends with Mike Giacondo, I'm friends with these 3 other people, but me and my other people were all outside agitators." And so the FBI were very excited to talk to him because in March of that year, a group associated with the Catholic left had broken into the FBI office in Media, Pennsylvania, and stolen all the FBI files, which really pissed off J. Edgar Hoover, let me tell you. He couldn't believe the nerve of them. They were so sure that no one would come to them, but you should see the lax security they had. They had like a little lock at the top of the door. You just go in, you saw the bottom of the door, you crawl under. Man, it was easy, right? So they were embarrassed and wanted to do something about this. So when Bob Hardy came, they thought, "Oh my God, this is fantastic," which is why they put so many resources into it, which is why when we were arrested, I was being interrogated. We were in the federal building. They basically took us to different rooms in the federal building. I'm being interrogated for a long, long, long period of time. They ask all these questions. Then somebody comes in and he goes, "I want you to know John Grady spilled the beans." So John Grady was like the leader. And I'm thinking to myself, spilled the beans? Really? Really? So anyway, so I ignored that. And then after a couple hours, I said, "Can I stretch?" And they said, "Sure, get up, walk around the room." So I got up, I walked around the room, and I walked over to the window, and they said, "Look outside, look who's out there." So I look outside, and there's a mob of people out in front of the courthouse, including TV trucks and all this. So I said, "What's going on?" And they said, "They're here for you." And I'm like, I thought it was associated with the riots, right? Because there were press around for the riots. So apparently, they were so excited about getting us that they had actually files on each one of us that they gave out to the press. So they were well prepared for this arrest, right? Bob Hardy, very Catholic. Over the time, we got to know him and his wife and his children. Very nice wife, nice kids, weird Bob. Okay, so a week after we were arrested, his father-in-law was crossing the street in front of the post office and was hit and killed. And so that was a kind of a shocking thing. Then, a few months later, he was getting ready to take his kids to buy shoes. And when he got to the front door, this guy was at the door from one of the newspapers and said, "Can I interview you?" And he said, "Sure, come on in." This is what he was. "Oh, come on, sure, come on in." He came in. He's interviewing him. While he's interviewing him, he had sent the kids out to the yard to play. While he's being interviewed, his son falls out of a tree and is impaled on a fence. So his son went into the hospital, and Father Michael Doyle, one of my co-defendants, went to the hospital to see him and to see Peg, the wife, and he came in, and Bob Hardy said to him, "I knew you would come." So that went on, and what we think happened, according to Michael Doyle, because he then conferred with him much, he decided that God was sending him a message, these deaths. And his son dies, and we were all there at the funeral. It was like a wedding. The groom's side so it was the FBI and then us. So the boy died, and then Bob Hardy, who thought that God was sending him a message that he'd done something wrong because of this betrayal, he then said he would talk to one of the lawyers who was in the case, some people had lawyers, Michael Doyle, Father Doyle had a lawyer, and tell them what was going on with the FBI. And as it turned out, we had no money, right? We were just, you could imagine what we were like. Okay, so there we were, and we needed money for food, and people would donate, and people would, we were just trying to make our way. But then all of a sudden, Bob Hardy started coming in with all this stuff. He had money for us. He brought tools. I remember we weren't going to do the action the night before because we were missing this certain kind of tool we needed. He left and he brought it back. All that came from the FBI, which put me in a position of saying to the jury, they didn't care about those files because if they cared about it, they would arrest us before we broke into the building. They wanted to get us. This is what this is about, right? Because they knew. So that's Bob Hardy. And Ned was, many people were really hurt by it. I wasn't hurt because it was just weird to me because he wasn't my friend, but those people who were of his generation, they were felt more betrayal.
Thank you for that. Any other questions from people in the audience?
My question was when I first came and looked at it, and it was about the new Catholic movement for the left. I thought this was going to be hard-edged news of stuff that's happening right now. Do you guys know of anything happening now in terms of a little bit newer Catholic left?
Great. That was my last question too, so we'll let you comment on that. The three non-practicing, but still sort of always, once a Catholic, always a Catholic. What about the new Catholic left? Do we need one? Do we have one?
I'm very flattered that you call us new Catholic left. I don't think how old we are.
It was a book title.
Who wants to go first? The one today.
Oh dear. Heidi, could you? I'd be interested to know maybe what you. I think you probably have your finger on the pulse more. So that is me punting a little, but I do think.
Okay. So I work for the National Catholic Reporter, which, as you were nice enough to mention, Fred, does cover the Catholic left and has covered it since 1964 when they were founded. So yeah, there's still a Catholic left, but sometimes I worry because many people who are the left are former Catholics, and especially among younger people, so they're no longer connected to the institution, even if Catholicism has inspired much of their left or liberal thinking or progressive thinking. There certainly is a resurgence of activism in light of what's going on both in our country and now within the church. So I can tell you that the Catholic right, the new Catholic right, has way more money and is quite organized, and that the Catholic left could use a little money and organization. But I think the fervor is still there, and the question I think that we will be looking at and that we look at in our pages is, can people who are not institutionally connected to Catholicism still band together and have an influence as activists? So I don't know if that's a very good answer.
I was going to ask you, you report on the sanctuary movement in the church?
Yeah, so as national correspondent, I have a large beat, but I don't do it by myself. We have a number of freelancers and other writers. I haven't written about sanctuary movement, but we do have reporters who are writing about that. But I am covering progressive Catholicism. Also, what I do is I cover conservative Catholicism and kind of just write about who they are without judgment, but just to get the word out there about some of those organizations, the well-funded ones I was talking about.
So I was just a quick question. You go to Call to Action.
Do I go to Call to Action? So I have been to Call to Action in the past, and thank you for the prompt. I'm one of the speakers at Call to Action this year. Call to Action is meeting in San Antonio. It'll be right after the midterm elections, actually. November 10th, I believe, is the day. I'll be speaking about, and here's my topic, resistance. So I look forward to that. But the average call to action person is generally an older Vatican II Catholic, although they've done a lot to reach out to younger Catholics. I wish I had the answers to that question. I will be going to Rome to the Synod on Youth and Young People, where we'll be talking a lot, I think, about young Catholics around the world. I know we're done, so we got to move on to our next event.
Not, part of the Lord. And we did, okay, so, and yes, and there were activists that went down to Selma. So that was activism in the 60s. But I was talking, Mark? No. Michael, I'm sorry. We were seeing yesterday, and you were saying that while we, I really like the idea that Catholicism it does have a presence in Chicago, and because of the number of Catholics, we do follow what's happening in other parts of the country, and for some reason. And you were saying, Michael was saying that in California, some of the things that have been covered in Chicago would not, wouldn't be raised to the level of news. Is that what you were saying yesterday?
Yeah, so I moved to California 6 years ago and was
landed lovely, gratefully here at Loyola, and all of a sudden I started getting calls doing media spots on WGN and everything else. My little burgeoning media empire, which would never happen in California. There's just no stories on the news. There's no interest. So there's a discourse in Chicago that's still interested in theology or in spirituality or in good old-fashioned Catholic activism and/or reflection. So I think that's how I remember that conversation. And yeah, it's true. Heidi, do you want to say anything else before I close? Please put your hands together for this wonderful panel.